a big push.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to America, Some Assembly Required. Anna Maria Reitzinger and I will be talking about the how-tos of building and operating our American states assemblies and committees. We do have a schedule of topics that we will be working through, and we have moderators in the chat. We will only be taking questions on the topic of the day. So as we go along week after week, we hope to address and answer your questions on building your state assembly. Today's topic is going to be on committees, and we'll be exploring each one of the committees in order. If we don't finish them today, we'll finish them in the next podcast. So please stick to the topics and let's assemble. So, hi Anna, how are you?
Oh, I'm surviving here, just barely.
Snowed in.
Yes, we've got 14 inches and it's still coming down.
Wow.
And it's wet and it's heavy.
Oh,
And
wow.
we've been up all night and the electricity's been off and on, and we've had people stuck in the ditches all over the roads, and the school buses are unable to get through. And if you hear some noise in the background, it's my son. He's up on the roof, shoveling the roof off so that we avoid any problems with that. And
yep. Got to remove that snow load, right?
Yeah, well, this is very solidly built house, but 14 inches of heavy snow on a small flat roof is, it's a lot of weight. And so just to be safer than sorrier, this little office was added as an appendage after the main house was built. And it does have its own solid foundation. We didn't just, do a slab, but it still is a concern because it's a flat roof.
Sure, absolutely. Something we all have to consider in those heavy snows. So, well, are we ready to talk about committees today, Anna? That's how we do business, right? Is through our committees.
Early in our history, our founding fathers had to deal with the issue of how do you organize government for and by the people? A society of equals. How do you do that? And so they hit upon the time-honored tradition of the committee. And the British, trying to denigrate our government and our forefathers, called them all committeemen, implying that they had no individual authority. And so that, we were just a bunch of know-nothing rabble that kind of milled around and had a unnecessarily complex means of reaching decisions, and that we were lacking in leadership and executive ability, and blah, 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 blah. Okay. Well, as it turned out, we had the halcyon virtue of being honest, which the British obviously are not, were not, have never been. And we also had the consensus building that results in a true resolve across an entire culture. So we had in our fledgling government something that had never been seen before in the world. Committees had been used, but they had been used more for special purposes, to do research and bring back material for the general body to consider. And we do that too. We use committees in that way. But our government is literally built of committees. Committees are the building blocks of the American government. And I guess you could think of them as the bricks, and then you could think of the assemblies themselves as the pillars that are built of bricks. But anyway, it's no shame to be called a committeeman. Not for an American. We're proud of it.
Right. I think the opening segue into our podcast is a perfect example. And if you look at that, the reason why that I chose that was, first of all, in that barn building video, everyone knew their job. They knew their timing. They knew where they had to be and what they had to have when they got there. And they knew how to cooperate together. Mm-hmm. Great teamwork, right? Mm-hmm. And then again, in the later on where the pillars are being built, they're built brick by brick, piece by piece, concept by concept, all the way up till our pillars are all done. And I really focused on that in creating that video so that it brings out that very nature of who we are as assemblies, involving our committees and our people to do the teamwork, right?
Right. And, that brings up an important point for a lot of people, especially coordinators, to know anybody can serve on a committee. Anyone who wants to serve on a committee has to be allowed to do so. Now, you can headhunt. You can look around your assembly and observe people that have skills or training or experience that's helpful for your committee. And you can go out and try to draft them into helping you, which is a positive activity. But you can't restrict membership of committees. People have to follow their own hearts and their own interests. And, sometimes we get committee members that are just newbies in the entire subject. And so they're not really contributing a whole lot to begin with, but they're learning. And it's something that interests them. And because it interests them, they're going to perform better ultimately than somebody who just gets drafted and, you're on the so-and-so committee,
Right.
So we open up the committees, where we announce in the assembly that, we're populating our vetting committee, or we're populating our militia committee, whatever it is. And we ask for volunteers to populate that committee. And that's, everybody is a volunteer. Everybody is, a member of a committee. And that's just the way it is.
Right. So, what I find is sometimes people like to be asked. They find, and sometimes we do as coordinators or chairmen have to go out and ask someone to participate in certain things. Notice that they have talents We wish everybody just pop up and raise their hand and volunteer. It would save us a great deal of time. But at the same time, we do honor people when we go out and ask them to participate in a committee or in certain ways. So there's, again, as you said, there's nothing wrong with going out and kind of canvassing for the people that we need when we see talents or abilities. But, I have a lot of people who say, well, I don't know enough. And I always say, you know what, you're going to learn. You'll start to learn. You'll start to do the research. You'll hear the discussion. And we're all part of this, what we call our assemblies. Mm-hmm. And we have to embrace that and engage with that. And our learning comes not just in the reading that we're doing or the videos, or the podcasts and things, but it comes in the research that we do and the way we begin to listen and hear about how we write notices. What do we put in a directive? How do we organize the business? And then we watch that go into play in all of our assembly meetings as well. So I have people who go, well, I don't even know where to start. I wouldn't know what committee to choose. And my answer is, well, here's a committee list. Check off all the things that you don't want to do. And we'll see what you'll find out that there's probably something on that list that you really do want to do or that you have an interest in or experience in. And so, that's kind of, for all of those out there that are struggling, that's a great way to go about it.
Mm-hmm. And also to visit committees. If you find 2 or 3 committees that you think you might be interested in, get in touch with the chairman and ask to sit in on their committee meeting so that you have some idea of what typically gets discussed and the kinds of things that go on and make a choice,
Yeah, I want to say the first 5 months as we were really starting to focus on getting our General Assembly up, it was sometimes difficult to keep up with the list of who was on what committee because people kept jumping around, and that was okay. Mm-hmm. It's okay because they're testing out and trying out where their interests lie and where they can sink their teeth in to whatever subject it is that you're working on. And, sometimes in our committees, we might have somebody who has a passion in a particular topic, but doesn't necessarily want to permanently be on the committee. And, they can ask the committee to come and be on that in maybe a special purpose committee or just address the committee in their expertise too. So.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that some of the project committees is a good way for people to get engaged with the whole committee structure sometimes. A special topic will come up, like, a new wastewater facility or, a new farming initiative or something that is of interest to them. And then, they start out with a project committee and then they go, oh, well, I'm kind of drawn to natural resource issues. And so, I'll investigate our land patent committee and, I'll investigate our natural resources committee. They start to find their way in the structure. And we're, a lot of us have not really thought a whole lot about the potential of committee structures to get work done and how neatly they can interact with each other and how they can pass along different aspects of one larger topic. Our forefathers were not stupid, okay?
No,
so
not.
Yeah, they had the finance committee, okay, and they had the banking committee, 2 separate committees. One is to do with how to finance things, and one is to do with how you're going to bank and distribute funds. And so they kept things, I won't say compartmentalized, but you always had the option of going to a committee and getting a part of your work done if you're the, say you're the Ombudsman's Committee, okay, you have all these other committees that can help you get things assessed and make recommendations and show you tricks and here's how we do this and here's how we do that. And so it becomes a very interactive, almost playful distribution of the work. And you've got the people who are familiar with that particular thing doing it in an expert fashion.
Right. So, in a lot of our assemblies, and one of the things I hear is, of course, as our committees develop, some assemblies choose to just go ahead and their coordinators are either appointing a chair to get the committee started, or maybe the assembly has somebody they've affirmed as a chair. On Ohio, we kind of like to have our chairs develop from the committee, because everyone realizes who is going to best represent that committee, who's going to bring forward the business from the committee and speak for the committee. Sure. But the chair doesn't necessarily do all the work, right?
Right.
It's the committee members that do the work. And they may divide themselves up into the people who like to do research. Maybe there's people who, but it's really everybody's job to do that research on whatever it is that you're doing. No one person should be burdened with doing all that work. Unfortunately, we've kind of been indoctrinated to that in our lifetimes. I mean, how many times have we all gone when we went through school and we were assigned a group project, right? My pet peeve in the whole world, group project, because there's usually one or two people who do all the work, and they're the ones that are invested in it because they're invested in the grade, right? And the rest of them just coast along.
Yeah.
And our committees can't be like that. We've all got to be invested in the production of whatever it is at the very end.
Right. And we all need to learn to work together. That's something that, except for team sports, a lot of Americans never even experience. They don't know what it's like to be part of an intimate working group where, you have to rely upon the other members of the group to do their part and to work together. I find it very difficult now after, 50 years of nanny stating to get people to accept their own accountability and their own responsibilities and to pursue things with that kind of attitude. And we really need that. We need people who are going to not only do their share, but do it cooperatively.
And I think it's important that we all realize that someone over here might have a little tidbit of information. Somebody else here has a tidbit. Somebody else here has a tidbit. And you just need to kind of put the tidbits together to form everything that goes on. So the more we read, the more we research, the more that we interact and discuss these things, sometimes the better off that we are, that we bring our research or our, things into whatever it is. Oh yeah, there you go.
It's like a jigsaw puzzle where everybody brings their particular insight, their particular little bit, as you say, to a process. And once you start seeing how that works, you really begin to appreciate other people more. You begin to value others and their input more because you realize, oh, hey, I didn't know that. I didn't get that. Oh, isn't it good that Marjorie was there and that she, brought that forward? And what would we do without Joe? We've got a very solid man there who, just kind of keeps the lid on all of the different emotions and promotes an even balance. People like that, even if they're not into the detail, just simply by being there and maintaining a balance for the group are invaluable. And so I it's a humbling business to, work with committee structures and see how everybody contributes to a better end product.
Sure. And, some people are afraid to speak up because they might have an opposing view. But sometimes it's in the opposing view that you get some, maybe it's not all valid, maybe it's all valid, but even if it's not all valid, there's usually some good piece of information in that needs to be brought forward and considered in the decisions that you're making in that committee.
Right. There's some insight. There's some reason that there's an opposing view. And looking for the reason that there's an opposing view often leads you into considering aspects that you never thought about.
Mm-hmm. Right. So, sometimes that's expressed as, somebody will say, well, I know you don't want to hear my idea, and it's opposite of what you think. And when they really should be saying is maybe, have you ever considered, right? So, that's what I've talked about in past episodes about the language of diplomats is we have to learn to frame our questions so that we're getting our points across and at the same time introducing that idea in a way that it's going to be heard, right? So,
Right.
We can't just hammer it and expect somebody to always listen because they're always waiting for the hammer. So sometimes we have to be able to couch that in terms of, maybe a question, maybe it's a proposal,
Right.
Whatever that might be.
And we all fall into the pronoun trap. I call it the pronoun trap, where we take something personally that isn't meant to be taken personally. We need to distinguish and set things aside a little bit so that we're not taking it personally. It's just business. And people that are very used to business do this naturally and automatically. They just, bypass the, name calling and all the other crap and just, we're not even paying attention to that because, it's not central to the issues. And so you learn to bypass that in business and not pay attention to the personal slights and innuendos and the little, jibes and snarky remarks and things like that. We just, that rolls off like water off a duck's back. Okay. But people that have spent their lives in gentler occupations, people that have spent their lives at home and in library types, not in the hurly-burly of the business world, often coming into a committee will feel a certain amount of stress and be, hurt, be upset by the kind of, cynical statements that people make and even name calling and fisticuff type things that go on in committees, but you just kind of have to toughen up and realize it's not personal. It's not you so much as it's them. It's the people that are all impassioned and going on about something that have the problem. As long as you're cool as a cucumber underneath all this, it's, my mother used to say that someone could chew on her butt for a long time before they reached her heart.
I like that. Well, let's get into our committees here, Anna, and let's start talking about maybe give some ideas to each one of the committees and the directions, because I hear that too in a lot of the assemblies is, they don't really know what the business of that particular committee is. So these are the standing committees of our General Assembly. And that doesn't preclude other committees, right? We can have other special purpose committees. We can have subcommittees. There could be other standing committees that for a particular state may need to be there. But these are kind of the basic standing committees. And so our first one is general education.
Yeah, well, I think it's obvious that we've been out of session for 160 years, more or less, at the state level. And there's an awful lot that we aren't taught about our own history, much less that we're taught about our own government. All of this has required historical research. This has required a lot of delving in the books in the late hours of the night. And so there's a lot of general education that we never got in school that we have to go back and pick up. You know, who were the founding fathers? What is federalism? What's the difference between the federation of states and the federal government? I mean, these are important points. What is a state? Okay, what kinds of states are there? You know, what are the pitfalls when we're discussing state business if we call Confederate states states? You know, we're talking about apples and oranges again. And there are all sorts of things that people need to become aware of. They need to become aware of naming conventions and styles so that they can recognize which organization or which entity they're talking about at any given time. There are so many pitfalls and things that we simply are not taught that we have to learn. And the General Education Committee is the committee that has to be on top of this sort of thing and coming up with ideas of how to teach the membership about their own history and their own government. You know, maybe it's as simple as having one little learning segment in every General Assembly meeting, you know, some topic that's of interest to all that gets covered briefly in every assembly meeting. Maybe it's going to be the development of curriculum, you know, actual, here's the American history that you never got in school. You know, here's the structure of the government. Here's the American government here, and here's the U.S. government there. I mean, just having simple graphs and things like that would be good fodder for the General Education Committee.
Right. And again, you know, on Ohio, we kind of looked at it as a three-prong. We have the education of new people, you know. We have the education, we have to have the continuing education of the people who've been on the assembly for a while to bring that forward. And then we also have to look in our future, because there are some of us who are going to get old, and we need the younger people to be able to carry on, and we need to educate them, whether that's, you know, generally, you know, in schools. There, of course, there's no American history really taught. It's kind of glossed over. I could probably pull out 2 paragraphs in all of the textbooks today that refer to the American history, and most of it is the Disney version that's not even true. And you know, and so, you know, we're going to have to grapple with in the future when we can affect our state curriculums and be able to deliver that information to the education system as well. You know, for example, kindergarten, they deal with, you know, your family as community and who's in your family. They go into first grade and who's in your community, who's on your street, who's on your, you know, what's a town, what's, you know, what's that all about? And then they go into second grade where they develop, and they just keep developing that to, you know, usually fourth grade, they're about your state and your state history and the state development. And then they go into little bits of American history in 5th and 6th and 7th, 8th grade, where they're, you know, they've only got little bits that they do, and most of it is involves more geography and, well, we would hope, geography and world history kinds of things. So, so it's, we have to begin to start thinking about those things, and how to get our American heritage and history back into general education. So really the education committee is going to be really working on those kind of a three-prong aspect. And that, again, we've talked about how our committees are not necessarily unto themselves. So sometimes we can combine those committees, where the education committee is helping the orientation committee, or the education committee, the orientation committee, and say the outreach committee join together to create a package.
Right. It's a cooperative effort, not only among individuals on a committee, but between committees. Mm-hmm. So, you might have a 6-person education committee, and you might have a 5-person outreach committee, and a 10-person orientation committee, and you could all be working together on a single project. So all of a sudden you go from 6 people to 24 people, and everybody is coming at it from their particular committee standpoint, but it's all working together for good. It's all working out to be a better program for the members than if it was just one committee. So this is the kind of cooperative spirit you have to get going, not only inside the committee, but in your interactions with other committees. Mm-hmm. So, the ideal assembly chairman is somebody who can hear everybody. And the ideal committee chairman is somebody who can work with everybody. They might not be the brightest tool in the shed, but if they are the one that can communicate well with everybody and bring forward the ideas and the good qualities of everybody in the committee, then they're actually like the secret sauce, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. And so, as we're pulling these committees together, even though they might have their own little angle on what they're getting the benefit of the research and the work from all directions. And that's what that's really where we're at. That's what we need to do is really collaborate. And, maybe we're not going to use all of that in a presentation, but we're going to use bits and pieces, right? To bring forward the education on our assemblies. So, yeah. And there are some assemblies that use their general assembly more for education than anything. And that's okay. It's sort of in the beginning, but as your general assembly grows into more of the business of all of your assemblies, you're going to have to find time a separate time to be able to run education. And that was one of the things that Ohio had chosen to do, was we picked an evening. We surveyed all of the Ohioans to say, what topics do you need education on? Mm-hmm. What would most help you getting your feet firmly planted on the land? Mm-hmm. And from that, we developed basically 8 topics. Mm-hmm. And of those 8 topics, then we put together presentations on the 8 topics, and we rotate those. So every Tuesday night, there's a topic. And we just keep running that through the rotation. So some nights it's about terms and resources, where to find things. Some nights it's about how to stop your taxes. What do the tax forms mean? What's really our part in that? Maybe it's about travel and passports. And as our assemblies develop, those will change. Mm-hmm. The presentations will grow and they'll change because the conditions will change. When we finally get recognized and by our state of states, and our credential cards are adopted and put into their system, blah, 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 then we don't have to worry so much about, what really the laws are and how to go about, refuting their laws, we're going to go into what are the responsibility of what we're doing in terms of the travel. So, we just need to begin to see what's important in some ways to our individual assemblies, and then begin to deliver the education that they need. Can't always do that. Can't always do that in the General Assembly meeting, right? It can be short.
Right. Well, it's kind of like how to be an American is a separate topic. You've got all this history, which is grand. All right. We have a wonderful history. It's very interesting. It's very intricate, has lots of really spicy, good moments. Okay. But we have to live as an American today. It's not enough to know what John Adams thought about something, because, we're facing cybersecurity, for example.
Exactly.
So I think maybe a course in how to be an American, how to live in this world as it currently is without really being part of it and without being subsumed into it. We're at that point in history that the Bible describes as being in it, but not of it. Okay, we don't want to live that way. We don't want to adopt the dog eat dog, immoral, irresponsible, unaccountable, criminal elements of what's going on out there. Okay, and there's no reason that we should. So we can make a choice for ourselves and our families, and we can build the kind of society that is so attractive that nobody else wants to live any other way. If we have peace and we have goodness and we have fellow feeling and we, have these simple ideas and simple ideals that we cling to, then we're going to build the kind of society that our great-great-grandfathers envisioned. And it will be far superior to any other government can offer, because it will be a government built on consensus. It will be a government built on group benefit. And it will be a government that actually does the job of government, which is to protect the people and their assets. And just does it simply, not for profit motives. See, a lot of the problem that we have right now is that we have a for-profit corporation in the business of government. And so they want to promote more and more and more government, which is adverse to the actual benefit of the people. Because we don't want to pay for a whole bunch of services that we don't need or want, right? We just want the government to do its primary job and leave us our freedom to do our lives, right?
Right.
And we don't want to be paying 60% of our income for government services. But of course, that's what the for-profit corporations want. They want to induce need for their services so that they can give us more and more and more services.
Right. Well, and they also, it used to be when I was a kid that they were actually paid less than regular people, and they were the ones that had to pay the taxes for the privilege of having a job and the government benefits. And a lot of people don't realize that. And what they did is they expanded all of these services so that they could expand their employees, so they could expand their profit. Right.
Right. And they did it like magazine salesmen back in the 80s. A lot of kids may not remember this, but there was a time period where you'd get these things in the mail, junk mail, and it would say something like, "Congratulations, you've been awarded a free subscription to Field and Stream magazine." And then in tiny little print, it would say, "And along with this, you get 6 more subscriptions to Women's Day and, Better Housekeeping and, all these other magazines," right? And you get this one free subscription, and then you have these 6 additional subscriptions, and they're going to send you one of each one of these other magazines. And then you have to decide, according to them, which ones you want to keep. And then you'll be billed for any that you decide to keep, right? And all this is going on in a piece of junk mail. It's a contract. It's a contract where they're trying to get you to agree to take these 6 magazine subscriptions, right? And they were actually foisting this off on people. They were actually selling, all these magazines by force.
Yeah.
And the government does the same thing with government services. Ultimately, it was determined that it wasn't legal. It wasn't a lawful means of doing this. And these magazine publishing houses that were doing this were slapped on the hands and prevented from doing it anymore because it was determined it was a fraud scheme and they shouldn't be sending this out through the mail.
Right. So, coming back to our education, sometimes we have to make that choice on our assemblies. And I laugh because on the Ohio Assembly, we have meetings 7 days a week, basically. There's some piece of education going on at least 4 of the 5 nights a week during the week. And meetings then of assemblies on the weekend. So when everyone, it should be able to attend. But it's, it is something that as we go through, the education committee is going to have to realize that they're not going to have enough time in General Assembly meetings necessarily to do the kind of education they need to do, that they're going to have to move that to a separate time sometime during the week, and to pick that time, based on their the people in their assemblies. So, yeah. So, there's all kinds of topics, and what I would recommend is that they really take and survey their people and try to find out what they need, what they want, what they're interested in, what they need to hear, and what confusion they may have in terms of questions. There's sometimes we just do a question and answer session. Sometimes those are some of the greatest education you can do.
Yeah. And we're benefited in this day and age. We're not limited to books. Okay. We've got all these wonderful video presentations. We have all these wonderful interactive development tools that have been developed by TASA. Terry's been very good about ferreting out good educational materials and getting them posted for people. So, we have quite a
Granobites, right? Granobites.
Which we're about to get going on again. We're going to start, we're going to pick up and we're going to move forward with the Granobites.
Good.
Because, we were more or less forced to stop at a crucial moment when we shouldn't have.
Yeah.
We'll get going on it.
Yeah. Okay, great. So let's talk a little bit about orientation committees. So go ahead.
Oh, well, orientation is part of general education in a way, and yet it's targeted. It's sort of like the grade school. We're going to bring people in. We're not going to frighten them. If people knew all that they need to know, if they had a vision of all that they were going to have to learn when they walked through the door, a lot of them would probably go, ah!
Well, I've had people that I've done their status correction and they get them on the land and all of a sudden they get this wobble, what I call the wobbles. And they all of a sudden they're like, oh, did I do the right thing? It's almost like buyer's remorse. What do I do? How do I live? What do I think? How do I express myself? Am I using the right terms? Am I doing? And it's like, slow down. I started the saying on the assembly almost 4 years ago about how do you need an elephant? One bite at a time, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, we go through orientation and our orientation is about taking those people who've come on our assembly a lot of times and they get their sea legs, right? That feeling after you've come off the boat and you've rocked for all your life, and you're standing on the land and you're still moving, right? You're still wobbling, and
Yeah.
you just don't know how to go forward. And so orientation helps us get their feet planted firmly on the ground, help them learn how to live as an American as opposed to the US citizen that they've been all along.
Yes. Yes. And it's a whole learning curve.
Mm-hmm.
You know, just understanding what a federal income tax is a big moment.
Oh, yeah.
Understanding that what a driver is as opposed to a traveler is another big moment.
Mm-hmm.
Being able to talk about these things. A lot of this kind of as something taboo to a lot of people because, of course, the corporations that are benefiting from these fraudulent activities don't want us to wake up and realize what they've done. It's shameful what they've done, and they are understandably concerned about keeping it under wraps. So these are things that people need to understand, and we need to be teaching them gently and leading them when they first come through the door to get acclimated to being an American, and realizing that being an American is something separate from being a U.S. citizen, because all their lives they've been taught that they're U.S. citizens. So
Right.
it's going to be a learning curve, and part of it's going to be very exciting and enriching and fulfilling, and they're going to be all excited. But part of it is also downright scary because it's outside the box for them.
Right. Well, suddenly the parameters have just gone away.
Right.
And so and how you communicate that to the other side. So, just in case somebody picks this up, the day you're born an American. And the day your mother signs your birth certificate, your political status is changed from being an American to being a U.S. citizen, meaning a citizen of the 10 square miles of Washington, D.C. And so once you start to hear that and you hear the differences, and everybody goes, wait a minute, I don't live in Washington, D.C. I've never lived in Washington, D.C. I've never even visited there. How can I be a citizen of that?
Right.
And it's all down to the political status and sort of the fraud that the fraud that they have brought against every one of us. And in orientation, it's really funny because as we deliver education programs and in orientation, you get people who go, you got to be kidding me. Really? Now that makes sense, and it's like the light bulb goes off. And then you get the anger. It's sort of like the stages of grief. They get angry because now they realize that what it's really also going to be about. So yeah.
And they realize that they're dealing with a corporation that's in it for profit and that they've been taken advantage of.
Yes, very much so. So, all right, good. Events. So the events committee reads sort of like, I always start out with, well, it is sort of the party planning committee of the assembly. It plans some of our meet and greets, but it has a much deeper purpose in eventually, right? As we get further down into our assemblies. So the events committee is going to be setting up and working with all of our election venues.
Well, and it will be something that builds community and which brings in new members and which interfaces with the public. You've got a great event coming up here in November, which will bring together people from all over the country. And it will give you that interaction and networking ability that is so crucial. And it's a family reunion. Isn't that a great idea? In Plymouth, Massachusetts, one of the primary places that we associate with landmarks in our history for the colonization of many people arriving in this country, harken back to those who first landed on the beach there at Plymouth. So it's a time to think about our immigration history too. It's not just about religious freedom and the pilgrims and the search for human freedom of conscience. It's also about immigration and the fact that everybody, absolutely everybody who's here, including the Native Americans, came from somewhere else originally. And that we have a population that is from every continent. It's an amazing country that we have here. And there's so much that we need to think about in terms of the contributions of waves of immigrants that have come. And, you can go back to prehistory and think about the contributions of the Pacific Islanders and the Chinese and the South American immigrants who came here. We even had immigrants from Iceland and Norway and the Scandinavian countries that were all here before there was any written history.
Right.
So this has been a melting pot for thousands of years. And it has never been totally dominated by any one personal, group, one ethnic group. It's always been a melting pot of different people from different parts of the world who have arrived here and made a living in this country. And something to celebrate because it gives us advantages that we don't think about. We can go down the street and we can eat around the world. We can go, we take it for granted here, but we can get good Chinese food here and we can get great Japanese food there and we can get, Italian food over here. We can get French food here. We can get Czech food. We can go to a German bratwurst house. Where else in the world do we have this?
Right.
That's
right.
When our country has to go to war, it's not just, one group of people. It's not just the English or just the French. It's the entire world is here. And we're all Americans, okay? And so we bring forward the knowledges, the languages, the depth of cultures. Nobody else can do that. No other country in the world has that to the extent that we have it.
That's right. That's right. And I often use that term, and it's a term from, that we were taught basically in grade school, the great melting pot, but it's even more so today than it was then, and very evident in how we have to build our communities, and what we have to consider in the events and things of our communities. So realize that events committee is really important. Like I said, there's sort of I always call them the party planning committee, but eventually they will help with the elections committee, setting up elections venue, making sure the tables and the chairs and the voting booths and the ballots and the people are all there to take care of when we get the day that we grow enough and our counties are organized. They will have events committees that will sit down and work with their election committee to put together that voting venue, that spot, that place where they can come together and choose their their elected officials. So, so it's a real important committee. And, to begin with, I always say, pick the people who like to party and plan, and it'll be a great job. We have a great committee on Ohio. We've already done 4 events this year, and we've just had a blast in getting to know each other, and it's building that camaraderie and those relationships that we need to be able to go in and talk about tough topics too sometimes. So,
Right.
yeah.
Well, and I think when people meet each other in a social setting, it's easier than to work in a committee setting because you've kind of become a little bit familiar with who that person is outside of the government activity, right?
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes I think that we don't give each other enough credit right out of the box. Our society trains us to make these us or them kinds of determinations. Let me put it that way. The indoctrination is very severe. You know, uh, what child isn't dressed in the latest fashion versus those that have all of the new cute commercial stuff, right? We make those sorts of determinations. And when you can bring together a whole group of people in a generalized social setting, it's easier to overcome that kind of stereotyping.
Right.
Let it happen in a more natural way that we come together and, break bread, have a cup of coffee, be relaxed, make everybody feel welcome, make everybody feel part of something. And then we can, break off into our committees and do our work and do some more in that same spirit, because that's what we need. We need committees that are working as in a community. We need to feel as a community, not an executive function. Okay.
Right. Sure. Well, we're so indoctrinated along the way not to trust our neighbor, not to trust our boss, not to trust, right down the line. I mean, that's the indoctrination that we have gone through. And that's a very difficult thing to break. We talked about this when we talked about founding principles a few episodes ago, that the mutual respect is gone. We had that credit card charged full, when we started out with someone. And, sometimes they draw on that a little bit, and then sometimes they add to that credit card, right? But today, so many people start at 0, and it's tough to come off of 0. You can't build relationships on 0. So our events committees are really important in helping us, find our way, get our collaboration, get to know our people, what their habits are, what their, where their stances are, what their personalities are like, and be able to work together. So, yeah, if your assembly's not scheduling those some relationship events, they need to do that just to pull people together and just have some fun.
I think it's interesting that new book, Overruled. We had this review by Justice Neil Gorsuch, about this new book that's come out, and it's explaining how they're dismantling and why they're dismantling administrative law. So it's a fascinating book, but what it shows up and what his and you were the one who brought that to my attention, his video interview. He's talking a good deal about the problems that the U.S. government is having because of lack of trust. People no longer trust the government. They no longer trust the process that the government engages in. And that lack of trust is undermining the government. It's undermining the US government.
Right? It's all gotcha politics.
Right. And so building trust and being able to trust each other and conducting ourselves in a way that promotes trust, being honest with each other and being honest in our interactions is key to success. And so many people have been taught to lie, cheat, steal, and get to the top by any means, and enforce your rule on everybody else, and separate out into us or them, and this kind of corporate model of life that they've forgotten how to be cooperative, how to make compromises, how to respect other people that you disagree with, how to conduct yourself in a way that's polite without being overbearing. There are so many things. We are so used to being in a us or them scenario. We're so used to having somebody above us telling us what to do. We're so used to jockeying for power of one kind or another. I call it positional authority, like just any kind of office, and some people let it go to their heads and they suddenly think that they're the commandant in charge of the concentration camp. And we've got to get beyond that. And events can help us to do that. It can help us to build a different attitude and a different natural community-based relationship with everybody else.
Right. So, a lot of times with all of that, that gets solved by developing those relationships through our events, through our meet and greets, through just having, the coffee clutch on our counties or whatever that might be. I always tell everybody, they always want, well, what does it take to get my county together? And I said, pick a date, pick a time, pick a place, and tell me, and I'll make the announcement, and then you can pick it up from there, right? So it's, events is going to be something that we're going to continue on in the development of counties. Even though we're developing our state first, we should be doing that as well on our counties and trying to get together. And as regularly as we do that, the confidence of what's going on for our counties is going to happen as well. So it's really kind of important. It's a very important committee. It's a fun committee. We're always looking for ways to get together. So, all right, records. This is a big committee.
Records and banking, they
Yes.
kind of go together like the twins, they're functions that are so universal to government.
Right. So, I'm also the elected records keeper on Ohio. So it's a big job to take care of and keep and archive all of the recordings and the transcripts and the individual records for the people who are corrected their status and come on board. And so that has to be something that you can't expect to be a records keeper and be a one-woman show, right? So I have 3 or 4 people who come and help me file and audit and all of those things for records. I'm going to be looking for somebody to assist me with getting electronic records loaded to our websites and everything else as we develop a little bit further along to manage that. And, records is one of those things where you have to be really detailed about and organized about how you're doing it, right? Mm-hmm. You have to set standards of organization and put those into place. You have to be diligent about getting everything in its place and where it needs to go. But then also, the records committee is where our recording secretaries kind of are in a committee of their own in the records committee.
Right. Also, there's some degree of confusion, I think, about records and who keeps them. Traditionally in our government, there is a secretary of the assembly who is a secretary for the assembly.
Correct.
Who is supposed to be keeping the minutes of the assembly meetings. Each committee has a secretary who keeps the minutes for the committee. Okay. And so you've got this kind of phone tree on this side, which is all about the assembly and its records, right? And the committees and their records, right? And then you've got the whole issue of recording our political status, which is another whole function. And so there's been some confusion between a recording secretary, right, and a secretary of the assembly. Similar words, similar names, at least somewhat similar. And so when it comes to records, you've got the internal records and the external records, right?
Right.
And we have to organize both. One has to be, it's a public record that has to be accessible to, say, patrolmen on the highway. It has to be accessible to the governor's office so that they can, sit down and go, oh, yeah, Lisa, she's an American. She's an actual Ohioan. Oh my gosh, she's a state citizen. Okay, and so we have those public records, and then we have the private records of the assembly, because the assembly keeps some extra additional things on file. So it's a job. It's a real job, and it's kind of a bifurcated job in most states, where you've got the political status recordings and all of the stuff that goes with that, the state credential cards and all of those functions. And then on the other side, you've got the actual records of the assembly. And somehow we've managed to do it all, Lisa.
Lots of hours. Lots and lots of hours. No, I'm used to it. So that's, so that you make a good point about some of the assemblies and being confused about what recording secretaries' responsibilities are and what some of the other secretaries' responsibilities are.
Right.
And our recording secretaries are just about paper records. They're about recording statuses and recording the important papers, notices, schedules of our members. And so that's an important, kind of go-to for what that, for the recording secretaries. And again, they have to be organized. Our recording secretaries here on Ohio, they go through 6 or 7 weeks of training. We put them through, and that training might be an hour and a half or 2 hours at a time. So they get quite a bit of training in the actual intimate. They might know a lot about documents. I had one of my recording secretaries who had been helping people with documents who's like, I know all about documents. And we got into training, and all of a sudden he was like, I only knew that much about documents. I need to know that much about documents, So, so it's really interesting, the things that you learn as you go along with with being a recording secretary in that too. So.
Oh yeah, and there's the aspect of public and private. Which records are public and which records are private.
Right.
Which are assembly records that belong to the General Assembly, and which are records that belong to you. I often, in early days, during that period where people would be going through buyer's remorse, they would change their status, and then they would go, oh my, I'm going to lose my Social Security. That was one of the things that they thought was, that isn't true, but that's one of the things that they thought. And so then I'd get these heartfelt letters saying, oh, I can't afford to lose my Social Security, and I want to reverse, I want to take back my status declaration. And I would have to explain, well, I can't take back your status declaration. And here's why I think you shouldn't take it back. But, if you want to, well, here's how you do it. You basically have to create a new record and paper it over. And only you can change your records.
Right.
Okay, because that's a private record that you created and you have control of it, and you have to make any changes, additions, deletions yourself by recording over it.
Right. Unlike being a U.S. citizen, the records belong to them. In our jurisdiction, they're our private property. They are ours, and we get to say what they do, what gets done with them.
Yes, it's a big change. It's one of those aspects of our system where you are in control of your fate in the public record. And so there's a lot of kind of education that goes on just in terms of what's public and what's private, because our system is about 180 degrees different than what people are used to. And there's some real education that has to go on with record keeping and with what the purposes of public and private records are.
Okay, so let's take one more, and then we'll take a few questions to finish up our hour and a half, believe it or not. So banking and treasury. Let's talk about, that's a hot topic right now, Anna. We've got so much going on, and we've got prosperity unions announced. And so originally those were kind of separate committees, and on Ohio, we kind of combine them into one and then have subcommittee on those. So.
Yeah, well, it's a constant source of amazement to me that something as simple in concept as both banking and treasury can be developed into such a snarled ball of coated wax string. It's, it's amazing, because absolutely, if you look at it, banking should be incredibly stupidly simple. You have money out, you have money in. At the end of the day, you reconcile money in, money out, and it should all just be very, very, very simple.
Right.
Okay? But instead, they turn it into this gigantic thing that is so hard for people to understand. And most of the complexity, as I say, lies are always complex. The truth is always simple. So you start out with the truth, which is it's money in, money out, and reconcile it at the end of the day. That's as simple as it gets, and that's the way banking should be. Okay, into this entire thing where they are basically stealing your money for seconds at a time and making profit off of your money without telling you. They're then stealing your money for hours at a time at night. After they make the 6 o'clock deadline and they've reconciled the bank records for the day, then they take your money and they invest it for 12 hours until they reopen the next day. This is called the night window. There's all sorts of stuff going on with banking that should not go on. Okay, it's criminal. It's improper in every respect.
Oh, and like hold your deposit for 3 to 5 days.
Right.
You have access to it, so we're going to use it, invest it, manipulate it, and then we'll give it back to you at the end of 3 to 5 days. Right?
Yes. Yes, all sorts of things like that, where the banks are acting improperly. And unfortunately, the government corporations are in bed with the banks that they are actually profiting from. And so the government corporations don't hold the banks accountable, and we take the suffering that results. Okay. Now, our banks are set up to be very, very simple. Most Americans think that the banks are functioning on what's called traditional carriage accounting, where the money comes in, the money goes out, and it's just simply reconciled at the end of the day, and that's that, right? But that's not how things have been working since 1946, when the government corporations decided to adopt a system of bookkeeping that was actually engineered and created for criminal purposes.
Modeled after Al Capone's system of bookkeeping, right?
Right. Double accrual, or keeping two sets of books, which our forefathers, our grandparents, and parents recognized as being a criminal bookkeeping system, and so should we. But that's what they've been using since 1946 and getting away with. In double accrual bookkeeping, which was designed by a man nicknamed Easy Eddie O'Hara, who was actually the father of the World War II flying ace, who the O'Hara International Airport is named after. Okay. But anyway, interestingly enough, Easy Eddie O'Hara was Al Capone's bookkeeper, and he developed this system of keeping two sets of books called double accrual bookkeeping. And essentially what it does is it separates income into two different streams. And in government, it separates them into two separate streams of budgeted and non-budgeted, which allows them to hide all the non-budgeted income and only show the public what's budgeted. And that's how it's abused in government. When they do it in a private business, then they are separating into taxable and non-taxable income, which at first glance seems to make good sense if you have both kinds of income, except that most of us who are working in a private sector capacity don't have any public income. I like to point it out to people that it's a federal income tax, and therefore it's a tax on federal income. And then I ask them how many checks they get from the government.
Oh, I said, did you get your check this month?
Yeah, well, most of us don't get a check every month. And those of us who do have earned those checks.
That's right. That's right.
And so, we've earned them from a pension or from a program that we invested in. So it's our money, it's not their money, even if it does come from Uncle Sam in many, many cases. The only people who actually have federal income are federal employees who are actually working for the government. And if you research this, it was a payroll tax.
So our banking is going to be substantially different. At this point, we have our prosperity unions, and then we have.
I have to check on Jim. Just a minute.
Okay. All right. We have our prosperity unions, and then we have our GFG accounts. And so they're separated out, those two things, in terms of our GFG is basically what we have for what's been taken from us. It's more or less the recoupment that we've been owed for the confiscation of the gold and the silver back in the 1930s. And so that becomes something that we're going to be able to draw upon. But then we also will have this prosperity union that will give us access to our credit that we've been so seeking and that we've never had direct access to. And that credit is more or less an unlimited ability for us. And that was all that's been built on our entire lifetimes, to be able to share within and put into our prosperity unions. So Anna, you announced this last week that, each state is going to have its prosperity union. Can you describe those a little bit?
Okay, well, people are familiar with the concept of a credit union, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, a prosperity union is different in that the credit that you're receiving is prepaid credit. Okay? This is money that you are owed because, for example, you paid taxes that you didn't actually owe, or you paid utility bills that you didn't actually owe, or you paid mortgages that you didn't actually owe. So all this money plus interest is owed back to you. You paid the interest on a national debt that doesn't exist. And all of this was done by various kinds of impersonation and legal chicanery. Okay, so you are actually owed all of this money back. And then extrapolate that your parents were victims of the same thing, and your grandparents were victims of the same thing. This is 160 years worth of financial fraud, all right? And it was carried out against you in secret by foreign interests that are responsible. So, all of these various other governments and institutions owe you, Joe Average, an awful lot of credit. And they also owe you your assets, gold, silver, other assets that were purloined, which is basically a seizure under conditions of breach of trust. Okay. And so now the tide has turned, and we're beginning that recoupment process on behalf of the people who are owed all this credit and assets. And of course, they don't like it, but they can lump it. And we've created a totally new institution that is devoted to recouping and returning the stolen assets and the purloined credit to the American people and all living people. I tried to explain this last night in the webinar. The creditors are the living people, and the debtors are all corporations. We've got a strict demarcation between the living and the dead. Okay, a corporation is a dead thing. It's an imaginary legal fiction entity. Okay, so it's dead. So the living people are the creditors, and the corporations are the debtors in all cases. And so the prosperity unions are to benefit the living. And you don't pay back what you receive from the prosperity unions because it's return, it's a restitution for funds that you and your parents and grandparents and great-grandparents were always owed during their lifetime that they should never have had to pay in the first place. And plus interest, because of course, the accrual continues. And the prosperity unions are a way of funneling this money back to you into your personal economy, into your own individual lives, so that you can use this to do the things that you need and want to do in your life. Now, because of the the whole situation, you have both private and public assets under this process of restitution. And so your counties, your state government, your national federation of states, all of these things are owed recoupment too. So you have both public assets and private assets that are under recoupment. And so the prosperity unions will be the way to return credit. And this will be like a gift card. In fact, we call the program gifts. Okay, think of it as an inheritance. Think of it as a inheritance from your forefathers, your parents, grandparents, and your earlier younger self. A pot of money that is yours, that is a very valuable inheritance that you have a responsibility to yourself to spend wisely for your needs and the needs of your family and your community now in the present day. Sort of a savings account that you never even knew you had. Okay? And so this is very good news for many Americans who have been impersonated and mischaracterized as debtors, as corporations, when in fact you've always been a living man or woman, and you've had to participate in this funky chicken fraudulent system. All right? And so this is good news, especially in that the corporate system is imploding on itself.
Sure.
So one of the things that's going to come out this week is a series of sort of explanatory articles that will help people to connect their individual personal situation, their mortgage, and the big picture, their Federal Reserve note savings, and the big picture. And it will become clear that the system is destructing because it was fraudulent. Okay? Like
Sure.
the Bank of America closed permanently. One of the biggest banks in the country just closed permanently with no warning. And they're trying to give out the information that it was embezzlement. It's not embezzlement. Bank of America was holding fraudulent mortgages as the primary basis of its assets. And so when it was discovered that the mortgage system was fraudulent, then they lost that asset base, and the bank had to close because they had no assets underlying what they were doing. So when you are basing an asset holding on fraud, guess what? But we are the ones that actually hold the homes. We're the ones that actually own the land, right? That those homes sit on. And so when we reappear and we say, okay, well, we're the actual owner, that's our asset, and any credit that was generated off that asset is also ours, the entire thing goes, it's like, it goes like a canoe flipping back over.
Mm-hmm.
And guess who's sitting in the canoe? You are.
Right.
So the prosperity unions are the first step to recoup some of the credit that was generated, and then to recoup the title to the assets also.
Right.
So anyway, this is good news for you, and the implosion of the false economy is only bad news potentially, in that as it goes away, there will be disruptions and a certain degree of chaos, and that's why we've been rushing and fighting so hard to get the prosperity unions in place, so that when these banks close down and take your money with them, you'll have other money in a different account, in a different institution that really is valid, that you can depend upon. And that will then become the saving grace of the economy. Because the economy that you've been living in was basically a fraudulent illusion that made you a debtor when you weren't a debtor, okay? Had you misidentified and impersonated as a debtor. And so when we correct that, the illusion goes away, and at the end of the day, you're still standing there. You're still
Whole.
You're still whole, and you still have, you have your gold-backed money, and you have your credit, and you're fine. And in this case, you're even better off than you ever imagined that you could possibly be, because the credit you have is already prepaid. You don't pay it back. You don't have a credit card bill in the mail every month. And you can use that prepaid credit to pay for things like utility bills, college loans, car loans, all that kind of thing. All we're really doing is flipping this whole system on its head so that the correct creditor is being credited.
Right. Right. So that's the banking side. Then we have the treasury side. And the treasury side is just like, some of our assemblies will have little outposts or stores that you can buy merchandise and things through that help fund special projects in our assemblies. Of course, then the treasury also is responsible for trying to lead the budget process in terms of the committees, the budgets, the spending, appropriations, based on those budgets, special needs. I always tell everybody, budget is a 4-letter word. And that's what my dad always said. It's BDGT, budget. Okay. And he always used to say, and it was meant to be broken. And to which my mother would have much, much consternation over, right? But it's true. We can't, right at this point, everybody seems to be a little paralyzed about doing a budget because they don't know what the future holds. And I always tell them, just try to give an anticipated of what you have right now. What are you going to need, in the next 3 to 6 months? Let's do it that way. And, for example, some of our, it doesn't take, as Harold Hines would say, it doesn't take a lot of money to run our assemblies because we've been running our assemblies all along on very little money.
Right.
However, we're going to have expenses coming up that we have to anticipate. Our marshal at arms, he needs his badge, he needs his uniform. We've got, if we're traveling to and from meetings, we're going to need those traveling expenses and possibly overnight expenses. Outreach may have some things that they're doing where there's travel involved around the state. There's just lots of things, in terms of, trying to get some of our basic services in place that we need to have. Eventually, when there is more funds, we're gonna need an office to hold records, right? Right now, most of ours are right in the middle of my living room. I
got to the point of desperation where I had to make an appeal to get new storage space because my house was not my house anymore.
I get it. And I trust me, I'm living it right now, 3 rooms worth. So, it is, it's really, it's one of those things that's what our treasuries sort of immediately are going to be dealing with in terms of appropriations. So, and they're going to be setting some of the procedures and processes for handling those budgets and those appropriations and how things get paid and how, what gets reported and how to do all of that so that people have the ability to operate in their committees and their assemblies. Yet at the same time, the Treasury has got full transparency on what's going on. So,
right. And one way for people to think about that is the banking affects everybody. Okay. The Treasury is government. Okay. The government's expenses and the government's doings. And people need to think about this too. As an American, you not only have your private world, your own private finances, your own family budgets and things that you deal with, but you have public budgets that you deal with, and you have public infrastructure that actually belongs to you, that is very valuable, that generates income, that also needs maintenance. And so the part of the function of the state treasury, for example, is maintenance of things like bridges and roads.
mm-hmm.
But, you have a share in the value of those bridges and roads too. It's not a one-way street. So you have public assets, and then you have public maintenance expenses especially, and you also have infrastructure growth needs as a state. Mm-hmm. And that's where your Treasury Committee comes in also, is you're going to have a budget that is concerned with the functions of the state assembly, the costs that you were describing, but you're also going to have a much larger budget that is concerned with development of infrastructure, replacement of older infrastructure that needs to be replaced, and maintenance of infrastructure. So, all these things go under Treasury, in the sense of, you're going to have to develop budgets for all of these major and minor expenses. Mm-hmm. So I would encourage everybody to think of it as the current de facto has it lined out as a capital budget. They call it a capital budget for all the infrastructure needs of your state, the actual building, the buildings, the roads, the dams, the hydroelectric plants, the grid, all of this. It's a huge, huge thing, which has huge assets and also huge expenses. Okay. And that's at a whole different
less the kickbacks, right?
Yeah. Yes. Okay. And this is an area that is very important when you're thinking about Treasury functions, because you're not only going to be running your state assembly, you're also going to be running all this infrastructure. Mm-hmm. And you have to be thinking about it in terms of, hey, that's my public infrastructure. I not only have a part of that, I have part of the responsibility for that.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, and I think that's an important part that you bring up, is that a lot of people at this point, they're just making, in some ways, and I don't mean to simplify it too far, but they're making that transition from when they first came in, and it was more like a club or to actual public government. And so you begin to realize, I always tell everybody when I do webinars with them, is think about how many people, how big the state of your state is. What do they do? How many departments do they have? What services do they provide that are actually the services they're supposed to provide? And then all the ones that they provide that they're not supposed to provide,
Or and they don't do a good job of providing.
That too. So it's when you think about the enormity of government and the budget that's going to take, it's large. I mean, it is very much and it's a huge task. So if you think you're not of value to your assembly, every man and woman needs to be claiming and involved, at this point.
Yes. And one other thing that I just wanted to kind of put in here about the public and private issues. A lot of people get overwhelmed and they realize that their governments, the corporations, are basically as they're going tits up in the goldfish bowl, folks. They don't have the money anymore because they don't have the asset base. And why don't they have the asset base? It's because the asset base belongs to you. Okay, so these corporations and all the things they put in place, like the state DOT, the road maintenance, the bridge unit that goes around and tests bridges and designs new bridges, that isn't going away.
Right.
And your part in this is you're going to be holding the purse strings.
Right.
You're going to be telling them, yeah, we want this project, we don't want that project. We want this to be finished within this kind of time parameter, not this kind of time parameter. We want to have a review and oversight of your labor union contracting process. We want to have a public referendum on this to find out what the people really want or don't want. And then what the people say is going to go. It's not going to be this process anymore of you going through the referendum thing and voting one way and then having the state ignore you. Okay?
Right.
It's not going to be the way it's been, but your part is not to go out and do the work. Your part isn't to actually go contract with the builder, okay? Your part is to tell the state what to do.
Mm-hmm. And to oversee it.
Right.
Because that's been the biggest part. That's been the biggest problem is, and many of us complain about what they've done, but how many of us have engaged and actually watched what they did and then held them accountable for it? That is why we're in the situation we're in right now with finances and everything else, is we've not, as a society, held their feet to the fire. Well,
we haven't been doing our job.
We haven't been doing
our job is to tell them what to do and how to do it and when to do it and how much to do it. And that's what the state assembly is supposed to be doing. The state assembly is supposed to be riding herd on the state legislature.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. So, Anna, I got a couple little questions that I'm going to put up. And so this question is a little premature, but I'm going to show it anyhow, and maybe we'll answer it next week. I need help writing the vetting committee handbook. Is there a final template on that? Well, I don't, vetting committee, each state, Elvia, is its own nation. You may find bits and pieces from other states that help you, but ultimately it's up to you to actually write what your state is going to do.
Right.
And the vetting committee is actually pretty easy, and I'll kind of prelude this to it, is it's your interview committee. Think of it as the job interview committee. Mm-hmm. And it's really pretty easy. Do they possess the skills, maybe the knowledge or education, or maybe they possess the ability to really begin at the job and learn the job. They have to have the ability to learn the job. And the vetting committee is there to ask those questions, right?
And specifically to ask those questions for candidates for office.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's been a generalized misunderstanding of the vetting committee that the vetting is supposed to be for new members. It's not. It's for people that are actually taking positions of authority in your assembly. And so when you stand for election for a public office, you have to do a criminal background check, so that, for example, we're going to elect our state treasurer, and this person is going to be responsible ultimately for billions of dollars, because they're the ones that are keeping track of what the legislature is producing, right?
Right.
They're the ones that are, kind of auditing and making sure that the money is going in the right direction. This is a big, big thing. Okay, these people are going to have a staff. They're going to have offices. So it's an important position. Well, what happens if you have an embezzler, somebody who's been convicted of embezzling at the federal level, and they're volunteering to be state treasurer? You see that the vetting committee is supposed to be catching and doing the research into this person and their background and who they are, so that we when we vote, we know that we're voting for competent and appropriate candidates.
Right, exactly. So we'll get a little more into that next week, Alvia, as we get into the vetting committee and talk a little bit more about it. But there really isn't a template, and you're just going to have to use some best practices ideas on that one. But I wanted to at least address it today. Yeah. So what is the minimum number you could have to form and act a committee? A committee of 2. You need at least 2, and really recommended 3, so that you've got a tiebreaker vote.
Or more, yes.
Yeah.
Hopefully you're going to have a lot more, but the rule for almost anything in our government goes back to the biblical text that says, Jesus saying, where 2 or more of you are gathered. And so it's 2 witnesses. It's 2 members of a committee. It's 2 claimants on the state. It's 2 of, if you have 2, you're in the clear. And, the de facto tries to get around that by giving its notary publics the weight of 2 witnesses, because they've got a person operating in their private and their public capacity. But in truth, which is simple, you're supposed to always have 2.
Right. Okay. So this one, can some committees be countrywide that are not state specific? Well, I'm going to say that all committees are state specific, Donna. They really, each state has its own flares, its own challenges, its own populations, its history. All those kinds of things go into the formations of our committees. And so, we're not a lockstep government. We don't try to form that way. And we're really about addressing the needs individually of our state. So, there's lots of advice out there. There are many of the assemblies that are willing to share their ideas and maybe their handbooks or their, committee work and things. But really the work comes when you embrace it and your committees embrace it and really research it, debate it, and then move it forward in your own assemblies. Your committees, eventually, the decisions are going to be decided in your General Assembly.
Right. Well, and I think that there is a disconnect in that the seagoing government, the corporate government, has a lot of functions that are the same or similar throughout the entire country. Like the functions of the Department of Transportation and the rules of the Federal Department of Transportation are pretty much uniform throughout the country, for example. But that's at a different level. Each state is a nation and a country unto itself. And this is something that we're having to take in, because that's been missing in the entire picture for so long. But yes, we are nation states. The nation is the population, and the state is the landmass that is defined by the borders, right? And the features of that particular place. And so it's a different concept. Each state has its own government, it is its own country. But we have certain things that very early in our existence we agreed would be handled as a mutual power. And the states all agreed that certain things they would handle together as an entire group and have a unified front on. Such things as the currency for the entire country, the defense of the entire country. Those are things that are under the Federation bailiwick.
Right.
And that's because of that mutual powers agreement. And you see some of those mutual powers reflected in the federal constitutions because those powers are being delegated to some extent to the federal subcontractors. Okay? But the actual holder of all those mutual powers is the Federation of States. So the way it works is that the county governments form the union states, right? Mm-hmm. The union states delegate the mutual powers to the Federation of States, which operates internationally, right? Mm-hmm. The Federation then delegates the powers to the federal government. Out of all of its abundance of mutual powers, it takes those that were agreed upon and distributes those 18 enumerated powers out to the federal contractors. And that is how the actual delegation happens, from the Union states to the Federation of States, from the Federation to the federal subcontractors. And that's why it's called a federal government and not a confederal government.
Right. Right.
It's from the Federation that the delegation comes.
Right. And again, each state has got its own set of, South Dakota has no navigable waterways, right? And it's going to be different than Ohio in terms of how it goes about its committees and the focuses of those committees. And it's really based state to state in terms of population. They have other challenges that Ohio doesn't have. So that's why we don't do that as, kind of cooperatively in that way. But we can learn from each other. And there's plenty of that goes on. So.
And there's no reason to be xenophobic. We have some people come into the assemblies and they're so frantic because the federal subcontractors have abused and have overstepped their boundaries so grotesquely that we have people that come in and they're so vehement about states' rights, states' rights. Well, we understand that, but the mutual powers actually are of supreme benefit to all states. As the example that Lisa just gave, South Dakota has no navigable waters. It doesn't have access to the Great Lakes. It doesn't have any major river systems. It doesn't have access to the sea. Well, what would happen if, for example, say that South Dakota gets 30% of their produce from California. And all of a sudden, California decided, well, we're going to take advantage of the fact that we have our sea coast and our ports and our facilities and all this stuff. And we're going to just charge an arbitrary 50% tariff to all goods going to South Dakota.
Yeah.
And what if South Dakota were to say, oh, well, we're going to charge a 70% tariff on all wheat going to California? Mm-hmm. And so if we didn't have the mutual powers agreements, if we didn't all throw in together, we would have these kinds of constant kind of tax and tariff wars going on among ourselves that would eat up our ability to be productive and to trade and to do all these other crucial things. And we would become a whole bunch of bickering little states, just like Europe.
Right.
And the reason that our forefathers decided against that was that they could observe what had happened in Europe.
Oh, yeah.
Where Holland was taxing Germany, and Germany was taxing France, and everybody had different forms of currency, and you had to constantly change currencies and keep track of all of that. And they looked at Europe and all of the fighting and all the wars that erupted in Europe and all of the unnecessary bookkeeping that Europe was bearing as a social cost. And they said no to that. And they were wise to say no to that. That's part of what's allowed America to make the kind of economic progress it's made, is that we have a structure that does not burden us. We have a structure that allows us to share our benefits and share our lacks in a way that's completely egalitarian and fair. And so for some purposes, we operate as if it was one country. But for other purposes, the state is a country unto itself. And the only reason that we have this larger ability to conduct interstate trade, for example, is because of the mutual powers.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. One last question. I think this one will be a quick one. Is the coordinator still required to have a copy of each man or woman's 1779 and witness testimonies in their possession for the assembly membership to be recognized? It used to be required, or is that just the record is kept with the assembly record keeper?
The assembly record keeper is the one who's supposed to be keeping this, but at the beginning, the coordinator was functioning in all these different ways. Yeah,
all do all.
right. It was like a one-man band. They had to play the drums, and they had to hit the and they had to keep the rhythm going. So the coordinator had that responsibility to begin with. But once you get to the point where you have an assembly secretary, the secretary should be keeping the minutes of the assembly meetings and the committee meetings. The recording secretary should be keeping the records that you're referring to. And of course, we have them in the ether, we have them digitally, right? We have the JPEGs and everything, but we like to keep a hard copy simply so that when and if the lights go off, as they did on me this morning, you have something that you can hold in your hand and you can still know what you're doing.
Right. Right. And the records keeper, at least I keep a master roster, and, I can provide that to my marshal at arms or my coordinator pro tem, so that they have a copy of the current people in contact on Ohio as well. So, that's a way to handle it too, Mary, is to have that master roster list. So, yeah, you're off the hook. Good news, you're off the hook.
And in this day and age, where we are subject to so many computer viruses and computer infiltrations of, hackers, and so many things can go wrong, having a hard copy and having it distributed to at least, a couple of people makes good sense. Or look at the situation in North Carolina. It's just by the hand of God that we didn't lose members.
Right.
I was looking at the devastation and the number of people displaced and the kind of injuries that were going on there. I was literally amazed that we didn't lose lives of our members there in North Carolina. It was a wonderful blessing that we didn't. But we still have a lot of recovery. A lot of people lost homes and business property, and it's wonderful that we have the records in multiple places that people had access, so that, yeah, we knew where our members were. We knew their names. We had their addresses. We had their phone numbers. We had their emails. We knew who was in the worst hit areas immediately. And you have to think about it in terms of that too, because it's not just all public records for the sake of the public. Sometimes it's the sake of the private. It's sometimes a necessary thing for the government, whose job it is to protect the people and their assets, to have that contact information right now and have it securely, so that, we can go find Rebecca. We can go find Hiram. We can go find Joe. And know that they're safe and make sure that they have what they need.
Right. So I misspoke before. One last question. This is it unreasonable to consider an honors and ethics committee, or is that integrated into each other committee? Well, I'm not exactly sure what they mean by honors and ethics, but I would think that if you had a question about someone's ethics on a committee or a committee's ethics, you would take that to the oversight committee. And if it's about somebody acting unhonorably, depending on whether that's in their role or whether that's just in their own individual life, that would either go to the ombudsman or to the oversight committee, and it's covered in there.
Basically, the ombudsman is there as an arbitration service to try to work things out. Okay.
Right.
To come to somebody that for whatever reason you feel you can't just come to on an individual private basis. But someone that you're having trouble with on some sort of civilian and civil matter, you're having a disagreement about something, okay, but it's not a crime. Oversight is more toward the issues are someone's embezzling. You have cause to think that somebody is trespassing or, doing something that's a criminal type thing. Then you take it to the oversight. Or if you had cause to think that one of the committees was operating improperly and, was doing something that was seriously wrong, then you would take it to oversight.
Right. So I don't really see a need for a separate committee that way, because we have two avenues, whether that's interpersonal or whether that's assembly business. So.
Well, right. And ethics and honors is something that is so intertwined with everything we do. We have to try really hard. We had a very recent and harmful, hurtful situation in one of the assemblies where one of the men had been accused of, sexual molestation charge type thing. And there was a record of the charges being made against him, but there was no record of anything beyond that. It was just a public, police blotter type thing of, so-and-so was arraigned on charges of, molesting a minor type thing, okay? And members of the assembly ran across this somehow, found this record of the allegations being made, the charges being brought by the prosecutor. And they, number one, wanted to know if the vetting committee had considered that information when they vetted the man for an office in the assembly. And they wanted to know if there had been any outcome, if he'd actually been convicted of this alleged crime. Well, on one hand, it's reasonable to ask those questions, On the other hand, the way to do it is to go directly to the man and ask him first and foremost.
Right.
And then, he can provide you with the information to go look it up for yourself and confirm what he tells you. Well, in this case, that isn't what was done. People went around in little circles behind his back and were talking crap about him, basically, and making all these suppositions and all these fear-mongering kind of gossipy stuff, right? And he wasn't given the honor. We didn't act honorably in going forward and just saying, okay, well, we found this and what's going on?
Mm-hmm. Right.
And so we need to stay in honor with each other. We need to do the honorable thing. And the honorable thing with something like that is simply to be upfront and honest about it and ask the questions.
Right. Well, Anna, we are way over time. We're 2 hours and 5 minutes. So
Uh-oh.
I know she's going to have to go. So thanks, everybody. We'll pick up next week where we left off. Thank you very much, Anna. We do appreciate your time and the conversation. And so everybody turn in, like, and subscribe, please. So we'll see you next week.
Thank you, Lisa.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.